Hello everybody, welcome back to American Textbook Reading. I'm Brian Stuart. We're going over the first lesson in Social Studies Book 2. So welcome, I hope you learn a lot in this book. In the first lesson, we're going to go over the first Americans. The first Americans. Interesting idea, right? Not necessarily the Americans who are there now, but the Americans who were there first. And we can see some pictures associated with that here. In this unit, you will discover the first people to live in America are called Native Americans. So these people who were in America for a very long time before the Europeans came, we call those people Native Americans. When we talk about different groups of people like Native Americans or Europeans, we can talk about culture because different groups of people have different ways of doing things. We call that culture. Culture is a way. How? A way of life of a group, an organization, or a country. So it's interesting. It's a group, an organization, or a country has different ways of life or ways of doing things. A group can be, for example, like a group of Boy Scouts, right? Boy Scouts is a group, they have a certain type of culture. They have a certain way that they dress. They have certain slogans or certain signs that they make. So they have a certain culture. An organization, like a company. Oh, Boy Scouts of America is also an organization, but a company can also have a culture. Like a company culture. How do those people dress? How do they act? That can be a culture too. And of course, a country is a nation of people, and they have certain cultures or certain things that they do that is according to their culture. So groups can be groups of people, people who have the same ethnic group, organizations like Boy Scouts of America or a company, and a country like America or other country. All have different culture, a way of life, a way to live, certain ways that they dress, certain things that they do. Now we're talking about Native Americans in this unit. Native Americans, of course, are the people who were living in North America before the Europeans. If you remember history, Europeans came to North America, starting with, people say starting with Christopher Columbus is when most Europeans started coming over to America. And they found people already living there. Those people who are already there are called Native Americans. Now, when we talk about native, what is a native? Who is a native? A native is a person born and existing in a particular place or country. So if you were born in Korea, you are a native of Korea. If you were born in America, like this boy seems to have been, he is a Native American. Somebody who is born in a place or existing. If you go to a new country and you see the people there, those are the natives. They exist in that country. They live in that country. They are the natives there. Let's take a look at a video. This is a video of Native Americans, and you can see that their culture is quite interesting. They're wearing different sorts of clothes, and they are dancing in a certain way. So this is the way that they live for many, many years, hundreds of years. This is the culture that this group has developed. Okay? Now to hunt. When we talk about Native Americans, of course, Native Americans were a group of people who lived before modern times. And of course, much of their culture, their way of life, they did certain activities. One of those activities was to hunt. Hunt means to chase and kill animals for their meat or skin. Of course, before modern times, if we wanted to get meat, if we wanted to have a steak, we couldn't just go to the store and buy one. We had to go out and hunt an animal for its meat. And of course, that was very common many hundreds of years ago. We also, if we wanted to eat fish, we have to go out and catch a fish. Fish means to try to catch fish. To try. It doesn't mean you're successful, right? If you say I'm fishing, it doesn't mean you caught a fish. It means you're trying to catch a fish. Hopefully, you will be lucky and you will catch that fish. Okay? So to fish means to try and catch a fish. And that's what they're doing. They're using a fishing pole. A fishing pole and line, and they are trying to catch a fish. If they get a fish, they will be very happy. This is a fishing pole. Have you gone fishing before? Maybe you've gone fishing with your dad or your mom or your family. It's a very interesting and fun activity. But a long time ago, people had to fish in order to eat. Craftwork. Craftwork is an interesting word. Craft, it's really two words, craft and work. Craft is some type of art or something that you make with your hands. When you use your hands to make something, you're engaged in crafts. Work, of course, is a work of art. It's an object. So craft work is work made by special skills, especially when you're working with your hands. You have certain skills. Somebody who makes a basket here, they're working with their hands, and they have to have special skills to make such a beautiful basket as this. People who work in wood and they make nice things out of wood, that is also craft work. They're engaged in a craft. Settle. To settle means to go and live in a place. To go and live in a place. This bird has settled down in this nest. By the way, I think this is a fake bird. This doesn't look like a real bird. It looks like maybe a little toy. But anyways, it could be a real bird. It's very hard to find out in this picture, isn't it? But anyway, this is a nest. These birds will come here, they'll make their nest, and they will settle in this area. But we can also talk about people, especially a long time ago, when large groups of people would leave one place and go to another place, and they would settle down there. They would stop and they would start living there, and they would develop the land and raise crops and raise animals, make farms and houses, and they would live there. And that's called to settle the land, or to go settle somewhere else. In modern times, we still do that. Some people want to change their countries, so they might move from one country and settle in another country. So that is still something that people do. Affect. Affect means to make a change in something or someone. If you affect someone, you make a change in that person. If you affect something, you change that thing. So to affect is very important, that you're making a change in something or someone. Here we have our chart. We're talking about culture here. We're talking about the first Americans. So it's very important when we talk about the first Americans that we talk about their culture. How did the first Americans, the Native Americans, how did they live? What did they do? Well, we can see very many different things about the culture of Native Americans. First of all, we can see a little bit about how they hunted. Of course, they had to be very good hunters to get meat to eat. This person here, they're riding on a horse, they have a spear, they are hunting buffalo. So especially in the middle part of America, the Native Americans who lived there, they would hunt buffalo. They were very good buffalo hunters. And they followed the buffalo around, and they would hunt the buffalo. Of course, they hunt many other types of animals like deer and wild boars, things like that. So they would hunt different types of animals. Fish, of course, also, if you're hungry and you live near a lake or you live near the ocean, you can fish and you can get fish to eat. You can try. Remember, fish doesn't mean that you're successful. It just means you're trying to catch fish. And there's many kinds of ways to try to fish. Clothing. Now, Native American clothing was very special, very colorful, and very beautiful. But sometimes they just used simple materials. We can see a video here. This is a type of Native American cloth that they made. These, of course, are blankets. Native Americans are very good at making different types of designs and patterns for blankets. And here we can see a shirt. So they're very colorful and had different patterns. Sometimes. Normal Native American clothing was kind of simple. It was just deer skin or buffalo skin, but sometimes they could make very beautiful and very nice patterns for their clothing. Farming. Now, of course, farming was done hundreds of years ago. Native Americans were, of course, very good at farming. In fact, the first European settlers who came over from Europe, they had a hard time living in a new land. They didn't know what plants were good for growing. So the Native Americans helped the Europeans plant and create farms so that the Europeans could get food to live. So the Native Americans were also engaged in farming. Over here we see housing. Native Americans had special types of houses, and you probably know the name of those, right? Housing, we called those teepees. T-P. A teepee is a special type of house for Native Americans. They lived in these, and they were very convenient houses because they were made of sticks, wrapped with skins from animals like deer or buffalo. But the convenient thing was they could pack it up and move it, because many Native American groups, like I said before, they followed the buffalo, so they always have to keep moving. So their teepees were very mobile. This is a video of some teepees. This is modern day, of course, and this is an example. Probably they're having a festival or a fair, and it's at a Native American area, maybe a reservation, where they have teepees set up. And you can see the sticks, right? The very long pieces of wood that are arranged in a circle, and then you put the skin around those to keep warmth inside and to stay out of the rain. And of course, they're very easy to pack up and to move, because many Native Americans moved a lot. Not all of them, but especially in the middle of America, they moved to follow the animals that they lived on. That's housing. Craftwork, of course, we talked about craftwork. This is an example of a bag. This is types of craftwork. There are many unique and beautiful things that Native Americans make. In fact, when I go back home, my parents live in Arizona, and sometimes we will go to near where my parents live. There is a place in the mountains. You can park your car, you walk around, and many Native Americans have tables, and on the tables they have many different types of craft work. Here is an example of a bag, but you can also very typically find jewelry like earrings or belt buckles or a brooch, some type of jewelry made with turquoise or some other minerals or gems, and especially silver. Native Americans use a lot of silver to make jewelry in that area in the Southwest. But anyway, there's a lot of different types of craft work for different areas in America that Native Americans made. Okay, let's move on to the exercise. We need to match these words with the different definitions, okay? We have the words here. Culture, culture. Native Americans, Native Americans. Native, native. Hunt, hunt. Fish, it's easy. Craftwork, craftwork. Okay, let's match these with their definitions. Number one, to try to catch fish. Well, that's easy. Fish. To try to catch fish, fish, right? It's funny because fish is a noun, but fish is also a verb. So fish is a noun. It's the animal that swims in the water, and fish is a verb. To try to catch one of them is to fish. So we use it in two ways. We use it as a verb. We use it as a noun. Two, work made by special skills. So if you have special skills, especially working with your hands, you can make this type of work. What kind of work is it? It's craft work, because craft is making something using a special skill. Craft work. Three, to chase and kill animals for their meat or skin. So Native Americans had to do this. They had to follow the buffalo in order to get the meat and the skin. And what were they doing? They, of course, were hunting. To chase and kill an animal for its meat or skin is to hunt. Number four, a way of life of a group, an organization, or a country. So if a certain group of people, an organization, or a country has a certain way of doing things, a certain way of living, what do we call that way of living? We call that way of living a culture. What is their culture? Number 5, born, especially born and existing in a particular place or country. So if you are born in Korea, you are a beep of Korea, you are a native of Korea. Somebody who is born in that country, they are a native of that country. 6, the people who were living in North America before Europeans. So in North America, there were people who were living there before the Europeans started coming over in large numbers. What do we call these people? We call them, of course, Native Americans. Here, Native Americans. Okay, let's take a look at our chart here. Our chart is Native American art. When we're talking about art, of course, a lot of art is craft work too, right? A lot of craft work is art. It's very beautiful, very well made. Let's take a look at some examples. Native American art, one very famous type of Native American art is the dance. Native American tribes, I'll write that here, tribe or tribes, many Native American tribes have different dances for different things. Of course, there's the famous rain dance. People talk about the rain dance when the Indians would dance in a certain way, and they're hoping that it would rain, or they believe that they could make it rain by dancing in a certain way. There's also dances for hunting. There's dances for different types of activities that Native Americans did, and they're very interesting and very amazing to look at. Let's look at a video of an Native American dance. Okay, it's a lot of jumping around, of course, a lot of up and down, and of course they go around. And the important thing is too that they have different dresses and they have different things that they're holding in their hands particular to their culture. Many of these things, of course, are made from things in nature. You see a lot of feathers from eagles or other types of birds. And of course, you see headdresses. These things they're wearing on their head, those are headdresses. And that's an example of a Native American dance. Okay, so that's one type of art. Another type of art is painting. And this is very interesting. This is a cave painting. It looks like it's in the American West. You see the cave on the outside, but you see this very colorful painting up here that was maybe painted hundreds of years ago. And many cultures express themselves with painting. Let's take a look at this. This is a special kind of painting. It's called a petroglyph, and you can see these on cliffs and on rocks, especially in the southwest where the climate is very dry. People made these hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and when we come along, we're not really sure what they mean or why they made them, but we can admire them and we can be amazed at how old they are. Actually, I just said this is in the southwest. We know this is in the southwest because you see this plant right here? That's a very tall cactus, and that is very common in Arizona, where I said my parents are living now. So this looks like this is in Arizona. And Native Americans lived in this area for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they left behind these types of carvings or paintings on rocks and in caves. Another type of Native American art that's very famous is this type here. These are totem poles. Now these are very famous in the Northwest America. Up near Washington State, Oregon State, the Native Americans who lived up there, they didn't move. They stayed in permanent villages, and they built these big totem poles. It's very interesting. Let's take a look at a video of them. They built these totem poles to put in front of their houses or in their villages for certain symbolic reasons. And they're very, very beautiful. As you can see, you have many different animals and like faces of people on top of each other, and they symbolize different things. They may and some people say that they tell a story. Some of these totem poles may tell a story about events that happened a long, long time ago. But you see, they're very interesting. They're made, of course, out of trees. They take a long time to carve them. They put other pieces of wood for the wings if they're making a bird shape, and they're painted very, very nicely and very beautifully. They're very distinctive or unique types of Native American art. Totem poles. Okay, let's take a look at the pictures and complete the sentence. We have different types of pictures here. Our sentence is Native Americans had their own beep. Had their own what? Let's look at the pictures. Well, they had their own dances, they had their own artwork, and they had their own types of housing, right? And they, of course, also had their own type of clothing. What is all this? Clothing, behavior like dances, artwork like totem poles, houses, a way of life. They had their own way of life, which is what? Which is culture, right? We define culture as way of life. So Native Americans had their own culture, their own way of life. Okay, let's look at our true-false questions. Number 1, to settle means to chase and kill animals for their meat, right? So if you settle somewhere, it means you're chasing after animals to hunt and kill them, or, oh, I just said it, to kill them for their meat. And I just said it, right? To hunt. To hunt means to chase and kill animals for their meat, not to settle. So this is wrong. We have to change settle. We have to change that word to hunt. To hunt means to chase and kill animals for their meat. Not to settle. We have to change it so it's false, right? Okay. Number 2, culture is a way of life of a group. Remember, we just saw the different pictures, the housing, the teepee, we saw the clothing and the dance, and we saw the totem pole. That symbolizes a way of life. And we saw that people have a certain way of life. We call that a culture. So culture is a way of life of a group. Yes, that's true. It is absolutely true. Number 3. Europeans were the first natives of America. So it's interesting to note here, Europeans were the first natives of America. That doesn't sound right because European means somebody from Europe. A native of Europe is a European. So how can Europeans be the first natives of America? That doesn't make sense, right? But it's not true anyway, because when Europeans came to America, they found somebody who was already there before them, who was there first, and those people were Native Americans. So this is not true, it's false. Europeans were not the first natives of America. Native Americans were, and of course that's in the name, Native Americans. Native Americans. Okay? It's interesting to note that some people will say Indians, but Indians is not a very good term to use because it's really mistaken, isn't it? When Christopher Columbus came over to the Americas, he thought that he had come to India. So he called the people there Indians, but that's not true, and it's not really accurate. It's better, it's more preferable to say Native American instead of Indian. Okay? That's just a little extra fact for you. Okay, we're going to take a break. We finished the vocabulary section. Let's take a short break. We'll come back in just a few minutes and we'll look at the reading section together. So don't go away. Okay, you guys ready to go over the reading passage together? Let's get started. Now, in our first sentence here, we can see it's kind of like a topic sentence, right? The first people to live in North America are called Native Americans. So that's the topic of our reading passage. The first people, we're talking about that. What do we call them? We call them Native Americans. So it's like a definition sentence. We're saying, who were they? They're Native Americans. Who were they? They were the first people to live in North America. We call them Native Americans. We also are going to narrow our focus a little bit. Native Americans. What about Native Americans? There's many things we could say about Native Americans. We're going to focus on one thing about Native Americans. Native Americans had their own culture. So that's our focus, right? That's what we're going to be talking about. Native Americans is our topic. Culture is our focus. That's what we're going to focus on. So the rest of the passage will be talking about culture. They refers, of course, back to Native Americans. Native Americans made many things using their hands because they didn't have machines, right? Nowadays, we make a lot of things with machines, but a long time ago, people used their hands to make things. What did they make? A bow, arrow, net, and canoe were used to hunt and to fish. So these things that they made with their hands, a bow, right, is a bow, it's a weapon. You use an arrow with a bow and arrow. A net, right, to throw in the water, and a canoe, right, to go out in the water, were used to hunt and to fish. These things are also part of the Native American culture because they are unique things that they made with their hands to do what they needed to do to live. It was part of their way of life. Part of their way of life, of course, as we learned, is culture. Now, besides making things that they needed to have to survive, they also made many craft works, like baskets and pottery, were used to store crops such as corn. So Native Americans would make baskets, they would make pottery, and many, I talked to you guys a little bit before about Arizona. There's a lot of pottery examples that you can find in Arizona and other states in America from a long time ago. Indian pottery is very interesting, and people still make it today. It's still quite valuable. Craftworks like baskets and pottery were used to store crops such as corn. Corn was a very common crop that Native Americans grew. Native Americans also had their own style of dress, their own dances, and their own art culture. It means their own style of these things. That's their culture. It was their own dress, their clothing, their dances, the way that they danced, and their own art culture, what they made for art. So this is all talking about the culture of Native Americans. We've seen things that they used to live, the tools like bows and arrows, nets and canoes. Then we saw things like craftworks, baskets, and pottery. And we're also talking about clothing, dancing, and art culture. Okay, there were many Native American groups living in North America before Europeans came. Before I taught you that word, tribe. There were many American tribes or groups. A tribe is a group of people. And these groups were different from each other. Some groups moved all the time. Some groups stayed in one place. Some groups just hunted. Some groups farmed or fished. So there were many different groups. There were actually many different types of culture among Native Americans, and there still are, of course. There are many different groups, there are many different types of culture, and they were living in North America, and they still do live there. Many groups have survived, and their children are still living in America in special areas. Native Americans helped them settle. Okay, who is them? Native Americans helped them? Europeans. Native Americans helped Europeans settle in many ways. Europeans came over to America. They wanted to settle in the new lands, in the new country. It was new for them. It was old for the Native Americans. But they wanted to settle there. Native Americans helped them. Before I showed you about the farming, I said that Indians or Native Americans helped Europeans learn how to farm because the Europeans didn't know about this new land. So the Native Americans helped them. Europeans and the Native Americans affected each other, changed each other in big ways. Of course, the Europeans changed the Native Americans much more than the Native Americans changed the Europeans, but that's a different story. Okay, so Europeans and the Native Americans changed the way each other lived. Let's take a look at a video here. We can see a video, of course, of modern day Native Americans. You can see also maybe some people who are European or European descent. I'm not sure if she's Indian or not, but you can see the differences or the influences. You can see people over here who look like they're tourists, and they are modern Americans, maybe not Native Americans, but of course nowadays people are all mixed together, right? Even though you have a lot of Indian Native Americans here, they are showing off their culture, they are demonstrating their culture, and of course many other Americans come to see this because many tourists are very interested in the way Native Americans live and also in Native American culture. Okay, we've come to our reading skill chart, okay? And the reading skill is talking about details, okay? So we have a main idea and we have details after that. What's our main idea? Our main idea, of course, our topic is Native Americans. Native Americans. What about Native Americans? There are many details about Native Americans. Here we have three main details. Let's take a look. We need to fill in these blanks with these words at the bottom. Culture. First, affected North America. Okay, so we need to fill in these four blanks with these words here. Let's take a look. Native Americans, they of course refers to Native Americans. They are the beep people to live in beep, okay? If you remember the reading, this is easy to put together, right? They are the what people to live in a certain place. They are of course native, so they are the first people to live in a certain place. What place was it? Of course, it was North America. They are the first people to live in North America. Second, they had their own beep and art. What do we do to fill in this blank? Do we use culture? Do we use first? Do we use affected? Do we use North America? Of course, we already used North America. We already used first. So do we use culture or affected? They had their own culture and art. That sounds correct. They had their own culture and they had their own art. Of course, art is part of culture. Next one, Native Americans and Europeans did something to each other. What did they do to each other? Of course, our only word left is affected, and that's true. Native Americans and Europeans affected each other. So they changed each other in certain ways. Let's take a look at the reading comprehension questions. How well do you remember the reading? Number one, Native Americans helped Europeans to do what? What did Europeans need to do? Or what were the Europeans doing when they came to America? Were they A, settling? Were they B, dancing? Or were they C, dressing? So Native Americans helped Europeans to dress, to dance, or to settle. Well, of course, you remember from the reading, the answer is to settle. Europeans came over to North America to settle the land, to move from one place to another. Not to dance, not to dress. They already knew how to dress. They already had their own way of dancing. They didn't need help in those areas. They needed help in living in a new area. They needed help to settle. Number two, Native Americans made many things using what? What did they use? What did Native Americans use to make many things? Did they use their dance to make many things? Doesn't sound right. It sounds kind of odd. Native Americans made many things using Native Europeans. Native Americans used Native Europeans to make things? That's really strange. How do you use people? Did they make them into slaves and make them make things in the factory? No, that's kind of silly. No, they didn't do that. Native Americans made many things using their hands. Aha, that's correct, right? They made many things using their hands. If you use your hands to make something, you are engaged in a craft. They made many craftworks using their hands. Using a special skill and using their hands, they made many things, like baskets, pottery, pots, canoes, bows, totem poles, many types of things. Okay, let's look at number three. Native Americans would hunt and fish. A, B, or C. We have a longer sentence. We have to complete the sentence. So Native Americans would hunt and fish using a bow, canoe, net, and arrow. Does that sound correct? Yeah, because bow and arrow is used for hunting, right? To kill the animal. A canoe is used so that they could go out on a lake or a river and they could fish. They could throw a net in the water and catch fish. So yeah, Native Americans would hunt and fish using a bow, canoe, net, and arrow. A is the correct answer. Let's just look at B and C for practice. B, using a basket, pottery, and crops. Hunt and fish using crops? You don't hunt and fish using corn. You throw the corn at the deer, right? That's crazy. You don't do that. Okay, so they didn't use baskets, pottery, and crops to hunt and fish. C, so that they could feed the Europeans. Native Americans would hunt and fish so they could feed the Europeans. Is that true? No, they hunted and fished so they could feed themselves, especially long before the Europeans ever came to America. They didn't know the Europeans were coming, so they hunted and fished so that they could eat themselves, not so that they could feed the Europeans. That's kind of funny. 4, Native Americans made craft work such as a basket, which. So these sentence endings will talk about a basket. What special detail about the basket? Native Americans made craft work such as a basket, A, which they used for hunting animals with. So they used the basket for hunting animals with? No, we just saw that. That's kind of silly. They don't use a basket to hunt animals, so that's not correct. B, they used a basket which they learned to make from the Europeans. So in the reading passage, did it say that the Europeans taught the Americans, Native Americans, how to make baskets? That doesn't make sense, right? So baskets which they learned to make from the Europeans, right? The Europeans didn't teach the Native Americans how to make baskets. That's incorrect. How about C? Baskets which they used to store crops such as corn. To store crops, to keep something somewhere for future use. Is that true? Yeah, that's what they used the baskets for. They used the baskets, they made baskets, which they used to store crops such as corn. They put corn and other crops into the baskets, and that's how they saved them. They stored them for future use. Okay, let's take a look at our chart again. Our chart is about Native American culture. Different things that Native Americans did in terms, in their certain way of life, in their way of life. Let's take a look. First of all, we have a picture up here of an American Indian, and it looks like he's chasing and he wants to kill that buffalo for the meat and the skin of the buffalo. Somebody who chases an animal to kill and to use their meat, we call that hunting. So this person is hunting the buffalo. Native Americans, part of their culture was hunting. What kinds of animal? Buffalo, deer, and other types of animals. These Native Americans are doing what? They're trying to catch fish, right? Remember, fish is a noun. It's also a verb. They are fishing. Native American culture was very involved in fishing too. Not just in the way that they tried to catch the fish, but also the things that they made in order to catch the fish. It looks like here they're using strings, right, to catch the fish, but they also use nets. That was easier to catch a fish using a net. Down here, we have the different styles, very colorful types of covering that people would wear over their bodies, right? Different types of clothing that Indians would make. And that's part of their culture too, because it was unique, a special type of clothing that Native Americans would wear. Down here on the bottom, we can see that the Native Americans were growing crops, especially corn. So part of Native American culture, some groups would do what? They would engage in farming, and they had farming culture. Over here, again, there are many different types of Native Americans, many different groups. Some groups, especially the groups in the middle of America, who would move a lot, they made a certain type of shelter. And of course, we call that housing. And this type of shelter is teepee. But like I said, there's different groups. Remember the group I told you about, the Northwestern Native Americans? They built houses. They built houses that they stayed in. They didn't move around. And they are not teepees, okay? In the Southwest, many Native Americans would build pueblos. They would make, they would take mud and shape it into walls and roofs. And they made, some of the pueblos are very big. They're almost like apartment buildings. But these are a certain type of housing too. These are teepees for the middle of America where the Native Americans would move a lot. So there's many different types of housing. Here, there's also many different types of things that Native Americans made by hand. Remember, we talked about that. We set a basket here, and I told you that when I go back to America, to Arizona, I can see many examples of jewelry, especially silver and certain types of minerals that Native Americans will make from these types of things. And we call those, of course, craftwork. Craftwork. Okay, so in this unit, the first Americans, we talked about Native Americans. They are, of course, the first Americans. We talked about their culture. We talked about how they hunted, how they fished, what kind of clothing they had, some of the things, how did they get food, right? Not just by hunting and fishing, but also by farming. And we saw that they lived in different types of housing, and also that they made many unique and beautiful things that we call craftwork. So this unit was all about Native Americans, very interesting groups of people. Of course, many Native Americans are still living today. If you ever get a chance to go to America, why not take a side trip and go look at some Native Americans who are living now? Sometimes they have festivals. Of course, you can also look at their craftwork in stores, museums, and even maybe sometimes just by the roadside. You can stop by and check it out. Buy some if you're interested. Anyway, we'll see you guys next time. Hope you learned a lot in this unit. Take care.